Hello, everyone, and welcome to Meet the Creators. I'm Andrew Garrick, and today I am really lucky because I get to talk to four fantastic people who, to a very large degree, decide our screen culture. We're going to be talking about the year past, the year ahead, what's changing. We're going to be getting to get their insights into television in general, which is really exciting. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm currently on, down in Maruya, the Yuin people and the Bagili Manji clan. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend a special warm welcome to any First Nations people watching today. A reminder to anyone, if you're watching this live on YouTube, please post any questions in the YouTube chat. And with all of that out of the way, I'd like to introduce, in no order of preference by any means, or at all, Ben Nguyen from SBS.
Stan now.
Stan, sorry. Oh, God, I've got it written down and everything. This is going terrifically. Susie Jones from Netflix. Susie Jones from SBS. Let's just do that. Tanya Denning-Orman from NITV and SBS. And Dan Monaghan from Channel 10 and Paramount Plus. Unless you'd like to announce that you're moving to SBS today, Dan. No, okay, sure. Thank you very much all for joining us. I'll go in order of who has their microphone turned on. Ben, I like to start with finding out how people started in telly, because I think we often have this conception that you start at the top. Ben, what was your first job in telly?
Well, clearly one of my first jobs was at SBS, and so I wanted to thank you for organising this SBS reunion. I think, Dan, I'd consider 10 to be the SBS of the commercial world, so, you can be an honorary member. No, but I guess actually it's interesting that this is an AFTRS panel, because I actually applied to go to AFTRS after I finished uni and wasn't successful. So instead I went overseas and worked as a production assistant on some shows like L Word and Smallville in Canada. So that was my entryway into television, and I quickly decided that being on a set was not the most exciting thing, and I would much prefer to be working in television from behind a desk. So eventually that's what led me to where I am.
Dan, your microphone's on. What was your first job?
Well, my first job was also a production assistant, and it was overseas as well, so I'm just copying Ben. But in the early 2000s, I finished my degree in media, film and TV production, and I jetted off to the UK as all good early 20s people do. And I got a job on creating a segment for the ITV morning show at the time, and it took 6 months to produce a segment once a week, which was the best gig because I travelled around the country, all around the UK, seeing all the travelling for free essentially. So that was my first job. And then my first job back in Australia, I started at Channel 10 many moons ago, and I was actually the assistant to the head of programming at the time, or the chief programming officer, whose name is David Mott. So I was his assistant for a year. And that was my first foray into Channel 10.
That is actually a career path you sort of see far more often in LA, I think, where assistants do.
Yeah. I think at the time there was no, there had been no, because it was, Australia can often be behind the times, and it certainly was an American trajectory. It was very famous on Entourage, as was pointed out to me at the time. But there wasn't very many male assistants in TV. But I thought it was a good pathway, and I really respected David at the time, and I was very excited to take the job. It was a good one, and it's worked out okay.
Susie?
So I realised now how fortunate my very first job was very brief, but it was through PFTC, which is Screen Queensland now, got a job as a comedy plotter storyline on a pilot that they were developing. So that was mine. I don't think I realised how lucky I was. So that's a good message to stay close to your state government agencies. Mm-hmm. And then my first sort of more long-term job was as a runner in the UK as well on a BBC comedy series that came through a strange set of circumstances where I was a dog walker and a cleaner in the countryside, and happened to find myself in contact with a production shoot. And but also I went down then landed as an executive assistant or a personal assistant to the deputy head of comedy at the BBC for 2 years. Terrible at my job as an assistant, but it was I was a hardworking and it was a great opportunity to try and sort of get a taste of all of the different production roles for every production that she was across, which was great.
Tanya?
Yeah, like I didn't have that overseas stint straight away, but I finished my degree in Rockhampton, hometown to Susie Jones as well. Shout out to Rocky, Central Queensland. And I kept on knocking on the doors trying to get in. I had to leave my, that region, end up down in Sydney and Canberra, end up doing, mostly in community radio, and then got a gig in doing corporates in Canberra. And eventually got a gig a couple of years later as a cadet for ABC. So that was my dream job. I kept on trying to get in to both ABC and SBS and kept knocking on the doors. So just freelancing, doing anything until about the early 2000s. So started out as a journalist and then eventually sort of worked my way through different departments and set up my own production company and, kept going. So tried a few different things.
Well, thank you all again for joining us and appreciate you giving us your time. We would be silly not to acknowledge that this last year has been just crazy, or these last 2 years have been crazy, and has substantially changed the way people watch television, either more of it or differently or however it might be. I was wondering how it changes the way you look at projects that are coming into you, how you're seeing pitches and how you're looking at what would run on your platform. Tanya, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it hasn't really changed in the sense that we've gotten a lot more development, a lot more concepts have been coming through the door, actually. I think it's given on the positive side of the fact that we haven't been able to be doing the productions that we usually do. A lot more development has been coming in, and what we've been seeing with our audiences is a desire to connect and dream big. So it's been an interesting reflection of what audiences are telling us as well. So we've, I guess for us within the Indigenous channel, landscapes and connection to country has really been a call out of content. That content's been going really well. There's still a lot of purpose-driven content that we need to do, and that we're finding more and more audiences are connecting with as well. So I know it's a wide-ranging way to respond to your question, but essentially I feel like we've had an interesting year of different ideas coming through, and also just, I guess, that need to connect is what I'm seeing.
Just seeing as you brought it up, I think it's really interesting the global nature of Indigenous channels and platforms. Are you finding that there is a broader and broader audience? I'm thinking about things like Reservation Dogs coming out, and suddenly that finds a mainstream audience. Does that rising tide lift all boats, as it were?
Absolutely. I think it's been one of the busiest years I've had with connecting on panels globally as well, and a desire to understand what we're doing in Australia. We're a part of a World Indigenous Broadcast Network, so I know our sister channel in Canada, APTN, has really gone, doing a lot more work itself. So there's definitely the desire as well through the climate, knowledges in that sense. So we've also, though, had a few challenges with being dispersed, change in leadership. So I'd say it's probably, we're yet to really experience the rise of the world Indigenous content. I'd say in the next few years to come. 2022 will be really kicking off the decade of Indigenous languages. You've probably seen a lot more around networks in Australia, desires on languages and cultures, which we didn't have growing up. That is definitely echoing overseas as well. So I'd say we've only just skimming the surface really of that desire. And, we've got Channel 10 here as well. We've got some really interesting partnerships. I think you're right, Ben, it's sort of like the SBS of the commercial world. So we've got some really exciting things coming up. So it's not, once upon a time, it was very much the Indigenous channel that was doing it. And it was really hard to get wider Australians to really connect with the content. And I think that's why we really have to think it's not just about what we're trying to do, but it's how we still have to make a connecting piece of, storytelling. So how do we do that? We're still mastering it. And, we've got some pretty incredible content coming up in the new year.
It's a really good segue, and you stole my segue from me. Dan, I know you're working with Tanya and their team on, is it the First Inventors? Is that
First
what the
Inventors,
project? How have you found the last year has changed and maybe changed the way you look at projects like that, which maybe you might not have previously?
Well, I think development's a really key point that Tanya made at the start there, which is we were forced into thinking about things a lot differently from, you know, when the pandemic began last year. We had a lot of difficulty in production creating some of those. We have the big budget franchise shows, and it forced our hand in a good way to put a lot more things in development. So we've done a lot. We also launched a streaming service, so we have more platforms as of this year. We knew that was coming up, but with the audiences changing, increasing in some parts last year, decreasing in parts like now, it's just about working out what the, you know, so much more, there's so much more coming through the door in terms of pictures, and what do? You don't turn things away as quickly as you used to. You don't make quick decisions. You put more things in development. You find out more about what you can do and where it can land in terms of what platform. Is it a streaming show? Is it a 10 show? You know, instead of just saying we've only got this slot 7:30 on a Wednesday, now it feels like the door has opened up. We can explore more topics. We can certainly explore more partnerships like we're doing with NITV next year. It just opened up our minds and opportunities with how much we need. And the content world, I think in your opening point you said, are people watching more content? I would say 100% yes. Are they watching it in the same ways they always have? Absolutely not. But it's become this giant hungry beast for us that we just have to constantly keep feeding. So the more ideas, the new different partners that we can work with certainly help to feed the appetite of people, which doesn't seem to be abating, and I don't think it will.
I mean, you say you don't give no's as fast as you used to. I get pretty quick ones from you guys. Are you finding that you are getting a better variety across the board, all of you? Are you getting a broader variety of producers and creators coming in and wanting to have meaningful conversations? Maybe Ben, you can sort of lead off with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that we've got quite a new team together at Stan. You know, I myself only just joined recently, Amanda Duffy and Rachel O'Kine in Originals. My boss, Kayla Scobie, as Chief Content Officer. So I think that in itself invites new ideas from new places. And I think sort of the other part of it as well, I don't know that necessarily the pandemic's changed, you know, kind of what we're looking for, but I think that certainly, you know, we saw the lockdowns in particular speed up that transition to viewing via streaming, and we've stated, you know, we have an ambition to get up to 30 originals a year, and I think sort of that's just emphasised the need for that, you know, as audiences increasingly making a choice to stream content, you know, we need to be there to supply them with new content. Yeah.
Susie, are you seeing that there is a broader diversity of producers wanting to talk to you about content on Netflix?
Well, look, I'm fairly new to the Netflix team. I've only been there for 2 months, but I'm certainly being exposed to practitioners that I've not worked with before, and having conversations. Yeah, so I think perhaps yes is the short answer. I think everybody has sort of touched on how the pandemic has affected the industry. I think the last 2 years have been really tough, especially on freelancers. I think what it's shown, though, is how resilient as an industry we are, and how we're always looking for solutions to keep going. And I think that's really impressive. And I think to the point somebody had made earlier, it has sort of afforded more time sometimes to development, or the way we develop something, and you don't all have to be physically in the same spot. That has its own challenges. But I think sometimes, you know, it is an industry that moves quickly, and so to be forced to slow down a little bit probably wasn't a bad thing. And I think we will hopefully take a lot of those sort of lessons as we move forward and develop content now. But yeah, I do think the world's maybe a little bit smaller and accessible. And so therefore you do hear from people perhaps you wouldn't have prior.
My sense was also, particularly at the start of the pandemic, that there were a lot of international Australians who came home, and so there was a returning of talent and a returning of ideas and a greater, broader international experience. Dan, are you seeing that trend continuing, and are you benefiting from that?
I think in terms of where scripted's concerned, in terms of writers, certainly it was good to have some of those people home. The big, the acting talent, as it is, that came home didn't necessarily open their doors to do everything. I think they still have their projects, although I know that Stan certainly benefited from a couple of those internationals or Australians coming home. But it was about the writers and people coming home and wanting to make things here, and in turn turning their faces to Australian stories. And I think that's the other thing that came out of the last 12 months is that we are, and Ben Stan's has a commitment to make 30 originals. Paramount Plus has a huge commitment to making originals for 2022. We all want to make Australian stories because that's our differentiating point. There's so much content coming up from overseas that to have those people come back home and work here on Australian stories was the most important thing that happened for both our platforms for 10 and for P+.
Well, I will say that Spreadsheet was a really good example of, Kayla Ellis is a fantastic writer.
Yeah.
She hadn't written a lot before, and this was her first sort of major script that she presented. Off it goes. I can't really think of a time in my career where a network would be willing to take a risk on someone like that necessarily. That seems to be a mindset shift.
It did come fully developed. There was a full script there for us to read. We saw that it was more than the bones were there with Spreadsheet, but the script that we read was phenomenal. And so we were able to see what she had done and then in turn turn it into 8 episodes. And with Northern Pictures on board, who we had worked with before, but probably not to this level, it was a great opportunity. Plus the fact that they had Catherine Parkinson, who is British, wanting to come over and star in the lead role it kind of all fell into place. It wasn't a no-brainer, but it was close to once we had all those pieces.
But I think I think it's worth pointing out that on the panel today, I think if you went back 5, 10, 15 years, it wouldn't look like the group of people we're talking to today. And I wonder if the diversity of age, background, and so on actually makes you as individuals have a higher risk appetite and a willingness to try new things with new creators and new producers. Tanya, do you think that's fair, or am I talking rubbish?
Yeah, I definitely can see the changing face of Australian media, which is really exciting considering I've been in it for a good 25 odd years. The last couple of years is just phenomenal to see. And I think whether you say it's a risk or basically it's a lived experience and then the ability to transform that into your job. So it's, as they say, it's a measured risk when you're in these sort of positions. You still have accountability that you have to deliver to, but you can bring your perspective to it, which is really exciting. And it's just truthfully reflecting what's happening in the world around us. So I think, we're definitely entering a new era of in productions and in media in Australia. And you can see the ceilings, various cracks happening all over the place, which is really exciting. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we're really going to see more of the shift within the next couple of years, so to speak. But the risk, I know for us as a smaller channel and ITV, we have a small population, around 3% of Australia's population. Yet we're very diverse, and there might have been more forgiveness earlier on, but the more desire and the more competition, there's a lot more expectations on how we do our content. And as I mentioned before, it's our content has to have purpose, and Susie will know the Joseph comment of provocative but with purpose. So how we make sure our stories can, as I was trying to say, connect with, not just resonate with you as a story, as a person, but how we can connect with more Australians to consume the story is still, that task that we have. And we take the risk, but it's measured, and we really want to understand the data and cut through just like anyone else does.
Ben, when we chatted the other day, I think you put it quite well. You're more willing to not adhere to an orthodoxy. You're sort of less afraid of the failures, maybe.
Well, I think, I'm just a big believer that you put more life experiences in the room and you get more interesting decisions and you sort of, I guess, some of that received wisdom and orthodoxy, you have the ability to challenge that. And I think that, I'm also a big believer in, creative renewal and the ability to refresh and I think, even sort of have turnover in those key decision-making roles, which isn't always possible, and I think sort of, industry-wide globally, it's sort of certainly not always possible. But I think that we probably all go through a phase where we're happy to try new things, and then we begin to get a sense of through our own experience about what's likely to work and what isn't. And I think it's just something that I think we have to constantly remind ourselves, and have people around us who are willing to remind ourselves that that's not always the case, and that it's something that we may have ruled out actually is worth considering if it's done in a new way and in a different way.
Susie, you're on Netflix, things tend to play out instantaneously around the world. Does that have a bearing on you as you're deciding what stories to tell? Do you feel like, sorry, this sounds naff, but an authentic Australian story will resonate globally?
Yes, I mean, that's certainly definitely that's the whole purpose of sort of having a local originals team, is to make content that resonates here and tells a nuanced Australian story, an inclusive Australian story in fresh and surprising ways, but that have globally resonant themes. So we are first and foremost concerned with our content cutting through here and capturing the hearts and minds of local audiences. But certainly it's a global service, so we would love it to be consumed by people around the world. So that certainly informs when we look at a pitch, whether it can do those two things. But I think, it's an exciting opportunity. I feel like the world, with the advent of more networks and more streamers in Australia, more opportunity for content makers, I feel like it's a chance to think perhaps bigger and beyond limitations of what's been available previously.
And I'm assuming you mean sorry, Ben.
Oh, well, I also just wanted to add as well to Dan's example of a spreadsheet that, Bump, which was our biggest ever original launch, coming back for a second season, but that was created by Kelsey Munro, who'd never had a screen credit before. And then, she obviously worked with Coolio Carbon and with the team at Rough Diamond. But I think these are sort of just more examples of the way that new storytellers are coming into our industry.
Does that, Susie, your point about sort of thinking bigger and things, that may be, do you mean in terms of scale of production, or in the end, does it always come back to character?
Yeah, okay, no, scale, people, I think scale can be deceptive, because you can have a great story at very different scales that will still resonate globally, and work locally. I think we're interested in fresh voices. I think there's great marriages to be made between people who have honed their craft working with new voices, because I think that's the sweet spot, I think, is probably fresh voices, but also working with people who have over years honed their craft. But we're working with teams on our development slate at Netflix on projects that haven't been announced, have been provided with opportunities to work on feature docs, and they may have never done that before, but have obvious skills from other industries, and it's about putting scaffolding around those people to make sure that they can achieve the best possible production.
Working with somebody who maybe hasn't had a huge amount of experience or what have you, that takes a lot of faith, and oftentimes they are, they're feeling the cool perhaps before others of us do. Dan, how hard is it to be in lockstep with broad Australian opinion 12 months before they have it, 2 years before they have it?
That it is difficult. I think if I speak from my own company, I think we try and if we talk about trends or social progression, or both, either or. I think if we're talking about socially progressive issues and incorporating them into our stories, I think it's key that our story is first good, otherwise no one will see it. But in order to be ahead of the curve, at 10, we have to be in front of our commercial broadcasters. NITV, SBS, even Netflix, they're light years ahead by nature of how they've developed. At 10, we trying to catch up. I appreciate that we've been called the SBS of the commercial world. I'm going to take that on this point only, mainly. But I think we have to be ahead, but it is difficult because we still are trying to attract broad audiences to a linear platform, and we do get the opportunity to try and tell slightly more niche stories on Paramount Plus. But when it comes to 10, we are trying to tell stories that people will see. And I just want to go back one point. I'm still afraid of failure. I don't like it. But so I find it quite difficult, and I find it quite sad because I don't think we ever put something to where, even if we feel like we're doing it for all the right reasons, or it is the right thing to do plus a good story, if it doesn't work, it's still disappointing, but it is still a good, because it is still a good show. I don't think we put things to where that are not well made or not well told, but perhaps we are sometimes slightly ahead of where we think the audience is slightly ahead of potentially where they are. That doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. It just means it's a slight bit more difficult at the time. And in terms of trends, equally so. I think we are always turning our looking towards what is next in terms of trends and what can we do so that we are creating the best content going forward. But it is hard because you still want to, you still have big audiences to serve.
You've sort of got a unique position, Dan, where you are looking at a linear platform as well as a streaming platform. Are you thinking differently when a project comes in of, oh, maybe that's good for here, that's noisy enough that it would get 7:30 on a Wednesday, or that's noisy enough that it would drive subscriptions? How are you?
Yeah, I think 10 is still where we target under 50s. We do big and broad. We do want to attract big audiences while telling really good stories or having the content be premium. That is our end goal. We know that people watch it differently now. We know that they might watch it on catch up on 10 play on PVR, but we still do want that conversation to happen within 7 days. So there is an urgency to that in terms of 10 to get those audiences and capture them, so that we are part of the conversation. When it comes to Paramount Plus, we are looking. It's a very hard question to answer, and you know the idea when you see it. We're fielding so many scripts in terms of scripted project every single week, and we want stories that are different. We want stories that are Australian centric. We're about making a good story locally that isn't just going to travel globally because it's shot in the red dirt or it's shot on Bondi Beach. We are about unique stories that are, Australian stories told well. By nature of Paramount Plus, we get a lot of Showtime content. We get a lot of CBS content coming through the platform. A lot of that's targeted very male and a little bit old. So we have to think about serving it, the broader family, the whole household, and women are can often be quite underserved by some of that content. So we do, 5 bedrooms went a long way to helping us there. Spreadsheet's gone a long way. So you will see a number of those commissions. I'm sure that's why the thought process behind Bomb Pond Stand. We've got to make sure that we are telling stories for the whole household.
Can I just jump in there on keys of success? Like, I guess with us, the way we're consuming media and information, we definitely wouldn't turn away the huge linear audience, but we're about shifting hearts and minds, and we're a small little player in the greater scheme of Australian media landscape, yet we've shifted attention in Parliament House. We've actually shifted the way Australians considering Indigenous affairs. We've got, that data of the conversations, the social conversations that people are having. We just did a massive documentary, Incarceration Nation. It resonated in a way that has this, sort of pebble effect. And a lot of our documentaries we do, I don't like to say the word worthy, but as I said, purposeful with impact. But, we'll play them again and people will consume them again, and we'll schedule the channel in a way that will, create a theme and reflect the Australian, zeitgeist or a discussion that's happening at the time. So while we still want that huge rating and, that era has left, but what we're doing is people are connecting with us and our story in a different way. So success is measured differently, I think.
On that point, there's recently been a bunch of articles comparing various ratings to 10 years ago. It's crazy. It just sort of, it doesn't, you can't compare that anymore because everything has changed in 10 years. One of the things that has changed is I personally wonder if we've trained audiences not to watch drama with ad breaks. Do you think that's right? Maybe Ben?
I think I don't know about trained. I think it's a demand that's come from the audience itself. I think it's about audiences, having a real desire to, choose and dictate the way in which they can consume content. I think, I think that I still think that there's a hunger there for the communal experience that television offers, and I think that that's really crucial. And I think different players, sort of both even in the streaming market, are exploring that, and whether you do sort of weekly scheduled drops of episodes versus all episodes at once. Just to generate that conversation, because I think even if you are dropping all episodes at once, you still are looking for something that can just tap into the broader culture, where people feel like they have a connection to others who are also enjoying that content. So I think that, but I think that, sort of at Stan, with our original content, we have decided that we do drop all episodes at once, at least so far. That we may play with that model, but I think that that's not so much, I think, what we've trained the audiences. It's more about just what audiences are telling us that they want.
I would say that I would just add to that. I think Netflix did the training for us, or moved the conversation on for us when they launched in the market initially. I think it is really hard to watch a scripted show on linear at the moment. We are outside of quotas. We do want to serve audiences on 10 with scripted projects, but they are harder and harder when you can watch the program on P+, on Stan, on Netflix without ads. It is much harder to get them engaged. It's a much more exciting proposition to go and watch that drama on a streaming platform, no breaks, in your own time, with or without others. In a communal household, it is a difficult it's a difficult area.
I think it's that shift towards serialized storytelling that's sort of come under the badge of prestige TV or whatever we want to call it. But I think that that kind of storytelling does lend itself to be able to consume multiple episodes at once, and the more complex the story and the characters, then I think that becomes more necessary. I think that, are there still opportunities for, kind of particularly big procedural shows or comedies, sitcoms that have a more kind of closed-ended, self-contained episodes and not free-to-air environment? I mean, I think that there probably are, but I think sort of, as the kinds of television dramas that we're making have broadened, I think that has driven some of that change in how it's consumed.
100%. I think the NCISs of the world, the crime of the week stories, are still have that commercial sensibility about them. We did My Life is Murder last year, and that had a very, crime of the week. Someone dies at the beginning, and then by the end, was it the mother, the father, or the brother? It's all still there, so that's a much easier in with ad breaks. But you're right, the serialized element is what makes it difficult for you to dip into the middle of a show. You can dip into the middle of NCIS and still work out that someone was murdered and have you guess at who it was. Not so much with something, like 5 Bedrooms. If you missed the start, you've missed episodes 2 and 3, you can't get back. It's harder to get back in. It's not impossible, but harder.
Susie, is that the same across factual, do you think? Are people sort of wanting that big hook that they can understand immediately?
Look, I think, factual on a service like Netflix is a broad church. We do have globally lots of series that are closed episodes, if you think about the Marie Kondo series and things like that. But I do think that there is the great joy of a streaming service with factual is to try and find content that does have those inherent hooks that hold an audience in. Obviously, there are genres that really lend itself to that, like true crime. But how do we, in factual space, think about content that's bingeable, that's outside of that genre? I think it's a really exciting challenge. I do think it's a challenge. I think how do you, obviously with a scripted series, you can craft those hooks and you can, create the narrative to make sure that we hold the audience in episode to episode. And I think it's something to think about in the factual space, because yes, we would love content that holds an audience in, Netflix originals that are factual, that have all of the compelling hooks and twists and turns of a compelling drama.
This is not factual, but it's reality. But when The Circle dropped on Netflix, they were one of those, probably not the first, but at the top of the game of carrying through the hooks and dropping them through the beginning of the next episode, and then blah blah. So that you couldn't just go, I'm ending, I'm out. So it was not that traditional linear broadcast of here's an elimination, see you next week when we get started again. It was, you had to start the next episode.
And that's definitely something we look for in pitches. You know, we look, is there that pull through? Is there that story propulsion in the factual space as well as the scripted space? So it's something to think about if you bring us pitches.
Susie, are there particular audiences that you think you've struggled to crack, and why do you think that is?
Look, because we're quite new in Australia, so we're yet to sort of drop our first Australian slate. That'll happen next year, which is very exciting. So obviously there'll be learnings from that. We are trying to find where there are opportunities. You know, we again, before my time at Netflix, but the play in Heartbreak High was really to service that young adult audience that seemed underserviced in Australia. So that was a definite play to reach an audience that perhaps wasn't getting what they need elsewhere. So we'll continue to look for those spaces and try and find those audiences that aren't being served. But, I mean, Netflix sort of does have something for everybody on it as a service. It's just about how to box clever with the Australian slate to provide content for a broad commercial audience.
I should acknowledge that someone named Liam S. in the audience sent that question in. That wasn't me. Well done, Liam. Tanya, I think you've got a really interesting balance that you have to do of trying to reach broad while talking to that core First Nations audience, perhaps. How are you balancing that across your projects? Is it through co-productions with things like 10, or what's your general approach?
Yeah, that is one way, actually. The partnerships with 10, we've been having the partnership with, we've had several with ABC over the years, particularly, we started with Disney, actually, back in the day. And then, our kids slate, we were able to, I guess, I feel like we're half responsible for keeping air in Australian children's television and showing how important, but also how, widely appealing our stories, particularly in a kids space, can be, not just for our communities. But, one of the things I love at SBS, and I should have mentioned before when we were talking about the diversity, is also how you can grow up in that organisation. And, you've got Ben and Susie here and the opportunities, but also the fact that, we're home to, more than 68 different languages, so we can communicate out. So when it comes to our Indigenous strategy, we can deliver Indigenous news and perspective out through the different 68 different languages across our audio and language service. And then what we do with our partners across, Viceland, Food and the SBS main channel, they have their distinct audiences, and they are audiences that may never switch on an Indigenous channel, but we can get to them through the partnerships that we can have. So our Going Places with Annie Dingo is a co-production that we do with SBS. Or, we've got some pretty cool music content coming up. We're looking at partnerships with TikTok and other ways. So we keep our, we really value the fact that we've built trust and respect with our core purpose, and that's to be there for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And through us as a content for, it is content or a channel for all Australians, but that's very, that's not practical in the sense that people have their niche, desires. So it is a balancing act, but something that's really exciting, because also there will be our community, but also non-Indigenous people that, trust NITV for its content, and they're coming to us knowing that it's a trusted, authored channel. So, what we celebrate is not only are we doing Indigenous content, but it is us behind the stage that's creating it. So you're getting something quite distinct that you don't get anywhere else in Australia or the world. So, but we, as I mentioned, our world global partners, we partner with, our global Indigenous brothers and sisters also. And I think that's, that was the whole niche of saying about 15 odd years ago, take the content to the audience, give them what they want when they want it. And, that's where we're in. So it's an exciting point, we're relaunching the channel in the end of the year. It's coming up to 9 years since we became freely available to every Australian. And I can say what we're doing is basically we've gone home as far as delivering what our founding fathers had wanted us to become. So we're more distinctly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. And that's because we're seeing the desire for more of this content, which is really exciting. And then partnering with the likes of 10 or ABC or, maybe Stan and Netflix, pitching to you fellas. You never know in the sense of, we can create beautiful collaborations, but also grow more credits for Indigenous practitioners who may not have been afforded an opportunity to break into Channel 10 or break into other commercial partners. So we're a safe space that grows. And then to go back to your earlier sort of point about being fearless and, we could take more risks, you bring that different sense of, lived experience. And, as consumers, we're all the better for it.
I will come back to the question of how to break in, because we had a few questions about that. But while you're talking about partnering and collaborating, I think that's a really interesting question, because obviously great creativity comes from collaboration and from inputs from lots of different backgrounds and different areas, and that's on a global scale. Often in Australia, particularly in the scripted space, you have to partner with an international co-producer or an international platform. Susie, Netflix does seem to be the exception to that, where it can just singly say, we will cover that in its entirety. That might not be right. I know you do like to collaborate with a local network often. Does that change, do you think, the editorial process and the output you're getting?
Not necessarily. I mean, we're really focused on creative excellence. That's kind of first and foremost what we want to do. We want to make content that's commercial with a twist. We've opened to sort of a bunch of different ways that might happen in terms of collaborations. Yes, there certainly is the local originals model, which is where we are your sole partner and we all, we're very hands-on. But I would say in terms of, and again, as somebody who's only been there for 2 months, I've not lived all of these experiences yet. But even if it was a co-production of sorts, either with another network internationally or locally, we would still really have that creative excellence at the forefront of that process. And so I think no matter how you come to us, we would expect to be involved quite heavily and editorially throughout the whole process. There's never really a set and forget, because we want to inform the Netflix of it all and be there to make sure we get to a point of creative excellence. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't think it would really massively affect the editorial journey. You just might have a few other voices in the room from different parties if we were to co-produce with somebody.
Ben, are you finding that most people are coming to you with an international partner attached or intended?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the point is that there's no way we can get to 30 a year without those international partnerships. I think that I think that increasingly there are significant players that have a global footprint, but then I think that just puts an emphasis on, those who don't, to try and find ways of working with each other internationally. So I think that we've done things with Peacock and with BBC and with various other international partners, and that's clearly just going to continue. I think where some of those relationships have been already in place when a project's come to us, then that's clearly been beneficial, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen that way. But I think that increasingly we just have to be thinking that way, and ourselves as as kind of creative people behind a stream of finding those relationships with like-minded media companies internationally.
Andrew, can I just jump in to shout out, if there are producers listening, a key to the co-pro collaborations, hats off to how they work with us. And, I think us, when we do collabs as well, our commissioners need to engage and work with each other in a certain way. We've been really, I was going to say blessed, but no, we've got our place in Australia storytelling when it comes to Indigenous stories, that our partners will ensure the, our editorial remains top priority with anything we're doing, to keep it authentic and real as well. So, I know if, there's potential producers that are listening or producers that are on, how important their role is in the successful collaborations. It's a newer space in Australia, but we've been doing it for quite a few years within NITV at least.
I think you've both hinted at the complexity of navigating those relationships for a producer. Quite a few questions have come in from the audience about how they present their ideas to you and how they talk to all of you here. I don't want to speak on your behalves, but I would suggest that complexity is a really good indicator of anyone who's trying to break it, to partner with somebody who has navigated those waters before. Otherwise, you will not end up in a place that you are happy with and that you will feel is successful, because it can be just so hard. And it's not a matter of giving everybody what they want necessarily, and you sort of get torn. Tanya, you might be the slight exception to that rule of having slightly more open doors, perhaps. But I know that Ben, Susie, and Dan, you've slightly higher, perhaps. What am I trying to say? To get over, to hurdle to get into your doors.
I think, Andrew, at the volume of ideas at all stages at the moment is, you would think, at an all-time high globally, not just in Australia. So it can be hard to just come with unsolicited with your idea and present it, because it's not the only one that arrived that day. So with us, we would, we can take them. It is harder to cut through that way. For us, it's better to find your foot in with a local producer in order to get that idea slightly more developed. That's not to say it can't happen, and we will take ideas, but it is much, much harder, just by sheer volume of how much is coming through the door. To get that idea to cut through is difficult. It has to have something, yeah.
Can you give us an idea of the numbers? Sorry, Susie, not to
interrupt.
No, are you getting 5, 10, 15? How many pictures a day do you all take? Solicited or not?
I don't take 5, 10 or 15 a day, but they do come through on email, both to the head. We've got heads of development, we've got heads of scripted, we've got a head of acquisitions at 10, and at the 10 team does Paramount Plus as well, plus the stuff that comes through the global channels, which we review for co-productions with our other partners internationally. So a lot, like there can be north of 10 ideas a day that you have to look at, but you can't physically, you can't give everything due consideration at that level.
And I think your point, Dan's really valid. I think we're really interested in new voices. We really want to hear from new storytellers, but I think there's also something to be said for honing your craft, getting some practice on other people's projects as well, making mistakes on other people's projects before you maybe bring your passion project to us. I think if you've never pitched a show before, it's not good that you do that for the first time to a network. You should go and find, I think, people who can open those doors and work with them and learn from them and leverage their relationships to cut through those volume of pitches. I think it's really good advice. And also the Netflix team, we're small and scrappy, but we go to plays, we read books, we're out there looking for ideas that present themselves. We're listening to podcasts. So again, I think it is about honing your craft and putting it out there into the world, but also I think learning on the job as well.
And I think as well, you to add to your point, is that just understanding who the platform or the channel that you're pitching to, and whether or not that is, you believe truthfully that is for that platform and for that channel. Does it genuinely fit on there? You typically can have a great idea, but it's not going to be it's not going to be able to be honed anywhere. It definitely has a better path somewhere, and you generally kind of know that. I understand that everyone just wants their idea to land somewhere, but knowing the platform with which you're pitching is really important as well.
And we really don't want what other people have rejected as well. We would, there's a whole, for years, we would be getting a lot of content or pitches that we knew people had rejected, and not knowing us, sort of understand exactly what you're saying there, that the platform and, have a bit of craftsmanship to the pitch. Yes, come in early with the idea, but make sure it's not just, say, if you're wanting to do racism, have a bit of a format or concept with it. So yeah, oh look, we've got this great idea, but think about what we're doing or what sort of content we're showing, or do some research, listen to forums like this. Yeah, I recommend that to not waste anybody's time.
Fun fact, I got a pitch the other day that said for the 7 network, and reasons why.
In the thing, yeah.
It was on the heading, it was in the email header.
Yeah.
It was on the PDF.
Did you buy it, Dan?
I felt bad for them, but
did you buy it just to stop 7 getting it?
I knew it had been stopped everywhere. But anyhow, maybe we got it. I don't know.
In saying that, like,
it's fine. It happens.
We have actually had a really successful program that was pitched elsewhere, but it was tweaked for us. So it is a fine line. So don't give up on the concept, but yeah, change the letterhead or have a bit of thought to it.
The only thing I'd add to all this, I think everything one's saying is right, and Susie's worked on both sides, so she's a very smart woman. You should definitely listen to her.
Ben's had enough to stand. He'd like a job at Netflix.
But I think I think that not just at Stan, but generally, I think we're kind of at a stage of television making where authors are really important, and having like a really fully developed voice of who's actually authoring that piece of television is really important. And I think that that's probably sort of something that we would be looking for in terms of ideas is where is it coming from, and I think working with people who have that creative ability, that proven creative ability to sort of tell stories is probably just as important as the ideas themselves.
The analogy that someone used to me once was you could have the best homemade biscuit in the world, but you don't just roll up to Coles and hope that they put it on shelves. You should go to work with Arnott's, and they will help you expand it, because that's what Coles needs.
And it's also just like, this is an industry that that completely runs on connections, and so the more you work on other people's stuff, the more you learn, the more you make more connections, and all of those connections will come up with you and provide you with more opportunities. I think every opportunity I've been given is because I've met somebody on a production, and hopefully I have impressed them with working hard. But I think you can't sort of operate in a bubble. You have to put yourself into the industry, seek out those opportunities, find where there are initiatives with, we've got amazing state and government agencies and federal agencies here in Australia that provide amazing opportunities for people to get in, more and more so. So I would say be on the lookout for all of those too, so that you can work on your own stuff, but also get that practical know-how from working on other people's content.
No, that's also been gold for us at SBS and NITV. We used to do this road show, and I think that the impact of COVID meant that we couldn't go around the country and have that tactile, have a drink afterwards and just sort of hang out with the sector. Like we are, we're all part of the same sector, even if we're a broadcaster. As Andrew pointed out, we all started somewhere as well. So I really highly recommend, keeping your eye out for any sort of road shows. And I know we can't wait to get back out in 2022.
We'll all go home after this and have a drink by ourselves, just as a bit of networking.
Yeah. So Ben's address is, we're getting quite a few questions about how big the local content bucket is and if there's more money available. To people who are asking those questions, again, I'll answer on everyone's behalf here that there are 4 people here where previously there were 3 networks there who were largely commissioned. There is so many more opportunities and so many more chances and so much more being spent on quality production in Australia. It's the fact that Dan alludes to 4 or 5 people getting 10, 15 pictures a day. The quantity coming through the door is also reflected by the quantity that's coming out on platforms and on broadcasters as well. So there are many, many opportunities. Sorry if anyone disagrees with that. Can I ask, as a closing thought, what are you all excited about next year, other than going outside and having a holiday? Dan, do you want to start?
Is there more? Look, what I'm excited about next year is we've got a lot of new shows of all scale, both for 10 and for Paramount Plus. We haven't announced very many for Paramount Plus yet. We've got quite a bit in development, particularly in the scripted space. We're doing 2 unscripted shows, 1 docuseries, which we announced called Couples Therapy, and 1 bigger, more reality series called The Bridge. And we've got quite a number of features and scripted in development. Getting those out into the world is exciting. We've not had this much on the go, obviously, because we haven't had so many platforms before. So it's exciting to see so much Australian stuff coming through. I'm excited about the pandemic going away and meeting people face to face again, though. Just that goes without saying.
Tanya?
Oh, look, next year is massive. I can't wait, actually. We're really shifting gears as a network, especially with the Indigenous space especially. So I think, as I mentioned, so next year will mark 10 years since we went free to air at the end of the year. So we're really looking at, we've got an incredible, which we announced at last year's upfront, First Wars. So we're really diving deep into Australian history and all the sort of conversations that mark off of that. And we've got, our first drama coming out. We've got an incredible ob doc going into schools. We've got some really exciting kids programming. We've been managed to shoot in remote Australia this year. To go back to, I think Susie made the comment, like the fact that we've been able to problem solve, our sector has, even though we couldn't get over borders, and the producers who've had to really try to negotiate to get over or get crew into different states, is, my hat goes off to it. So we're going to reap the rewards of a lot of problem solving in 2022, which I'm so super excited for. But for me personally, for the Indigenous production sector, what they've worked on, and now that NITV, I feel like, is, really living up to what we set up back in 2007, and then to be able to deliver content out in Arabic, Mandarin, and, a diversity of, languages that new Australians get to connect with us in the languages they trust. It's just really exciting.
Susie, what are you looking forward to next year?
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled that we'll be able to start sharing our local original slate. Obviously, some of that has been announced, but there's a whole lot sitting behind that we haven't announced. And I'm just so excited to see how it resonates with an Australian audience and hopefully beyond. But obviously, you're all aware of the ones that have been announced: Heartbreak Highs, Byron Bays, and Irreverent, which are all fantastic and very different offerings. But behind that sit another bunch of fantastic shows across genres that we're just really excited to start sharing what everybody's been working so hard on with the country.
And Ben, lucky last.
Oh, well, I think I'll just sort of echo what the others have said in a lot of ways, in that, we've got so much in development that is, will hopefully be in a position to be announced next year, which we're very excited about. I guess on the kind of nearer term, one show I'm looking forward to is Wolf Like Me, 8 Forsyths series, which will be launching early next year with Isla Fisher and Josh Gad. I think sort of that looks like it's going to be a lot of fun, coming together very well. On top of all that, I'm very excited to hopefully next year be able to finally go on a honeymoon after getting married about a year ago and having 2 failed attempts this year. So fingers crossed.
Well, on that very positive note, I'd like to thank all of you. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Susie, Tanya, and Dan, for joining us on the panel today. I hope that's been enjoyable and informative for everybody at home. I'd like to thank to our co-presenting partners at ACMI, Film Victoria and Media Mentors Australia. I've been asked to say, watch out for the next Meet the Creators. Have a laugh now and then, which is exciting, in the flesh at ACMI in Melbourne on the 23rd of November. Until then, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.